So at the time of being 6:03 on Wednesday, January 27th, 2021, I'd like to call into session the joint special open meeting of the Northborough School Committee, Southborough School Committee, and Northborough Southborough Regional School Committee. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Northborough School Committee, Southborough School Committee, and the Northborough Southborough Regional School Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the district website at the posted URL. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to listen or watch the meeting may do so in the following manner: NCAT Educational Channel, Verizon Channel 29, Charter Channel 198, or SAM Government Channel, Verizon Channel 37, Charter Channel 192. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the district website a recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. The meeting tonight is a joint meeting, meaning that we're meeting the three committees, not with the union, because the items on our agenda tonight are under the jurisdiction and the laws of the three committees. Nothing that we do tonight is under the jurisdiction or laws of the union subcommittee. So at this time, I'd like to call into session the Northborough Southborough Regional School Committee, and I would like Northborough School Committee Chairman LaBelle to call it into session, and Southborough School Committee Chair Roger Challen to call his school committee into session.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. I call to order the Northborough School Committee. All members are present.
You're muted, Roger.
Thank you, and thank you for telling me I was muted. I would like to call into order the Southborough School Committee, and the time is 6:05. We have three members, so a quorum is present.
Okay, thank you. The first item we have on our agenda is audience sharing. And audience sharing, as you know, is a means of taking concerns of our constituents so that we and our superintendent can understand your concerns. It allows the audience an opportunity to pose their concerns, questions, but we do not initiate dialogue or answer questions posed to us. We take any audience sharing under advisement, and then working with the superintendent, we'll see how to bring it up before the full committee. Mr. Martineau, do we have any audience members at this time that would like to share?
At this point in time, I do not see any hands raised. We do have one, and that is Dan Primack. And Mr. Primack, if you can just state your name and your address, and it's just audio only, so I will promote you. 1 second.
Okay. We also will have another audience sharing at the end of this joint special open meeting.
I was Dan Primack, 3A Powder Mill Lane, Southborough. Superintendent Martineau and committee. I just wanted to say, because it's the thing that's on the minds of most parents, at least the ones I speak to, it's been about a month and a half since we got a survey asking us about possibly reopening school 4 days a week. Important survey, it suggested this past Monday as being the open. Since then, we've received zero communication about that plan. It appears to not be on the agenda tonight, even though it is clearly, to basically every parent and every kid in the district, the single most important issue. That's all.
Thank you, Dan. Any other audience members that would like to share?
I do not see any at this point in time.
Okay. And Mr. Martineau, there was a question from one of the board members, if somebody has to take minutes, or is this being recorded?
This is being recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want it recorded via Zoom as well, or no?
We can, Stephanie, if you can start the recording, that'd be helpful, just in
Sure.
case.
Yep.
Okay, going on to the next item on our agenda is recommendation for Assistant Superintendent of Operations, and I will turn it over to Superintendent Martineau.
Sure. So thank you very much. Just a reminder that this is a special meeting this evening, so this is not a regularly scheduled meeting of the Joint Committee. And the purpose of this meeting this evening is really to review legal counsel for the upcoming fiscal year. So also on the agenda is really a conversation around the organizational chart. In 2018, 2019, then the acting superintendent, Christine Johnson, and I, as the assistant superintendent, brought forth a proposal to the joint school committees about reorganization of the operations and management of the public schools of Northborough and Southborough. Really, the goal of that organizational reorganization was really to build an efficiency and also to make sure that folks had realistic job expectations. And I'll use one position as an example, and that was the Director of Finance and Operations. The Director in Finance and Operations at the time was in charge of the three fiscal budgets across the three districts, was in charge of facilities, again, across the three districts, as well as food service, as well as transportation, and also was in charge of procurement. So that was a nearly impossible task. Becky did sit in that role for a few months, but part of the work that we really tried to do is make sure we're putting people where their expertise lies. So at that time, we reorganized and we really looked at operations and finance as connected, but disconnected in terms of the amount of work. At the February of last year, we went through a hiring process, and we were very fortunate to hire Mr. Keith Devoe, who was hired as the Director of Operations. Keith Devoe has done a tremendous work in his first year as the director, and it's been quite a first year for Mr. Devoe, coming into a pandemic and having to lead in a very difficult time. And I think that it's proven the partnership between the Director of Finance and the Director of Operations has worked really well, and has allowed us to pursue more grants, be more efficient, and really allow people to focus on their areas of expertise. Also part of the reorganization, we talked about teaching and learning, and really trying to make sure that people are focused on the operations, but also the most important thing we do is teaching and learning and instruction of our students. Our district has one assistant superintendent, and as you all know, Dr. Reinhorn has served in that capacity since July 1. Again, the assistant superintendent in past years, and having sat on the role, is responsible for a large range of tasks and responsibilities. And many of those responsibilities and tasks take that person in that position away from the focus of teaching and learning. As a couple examples, dealing with residency, really pursuing residency questions, the records officer, managing the homeless. There's a lot of responsibilities that are really important, but again, take away time from the teaching and learning. So this evening, what I am proposing is to add a assistant superintendent of operations, and no longer have the director of operations and shift those responsibilities of the current assistant superintendent that lie outside of teaching and learning to the assistant superintendent of operations. My recommendation is to appoint Mr. Keith Devoe to that position. Keith was a finalist for the assistant superintendent position. He was one of our top candidates. And again, I think he has been a great asset to our organization, has proven himself to be a great communicator, a team player, have great capacity in terms of managing and leading. And he also brings a wealth of experience in terms of his role as a principal. So not only does he understand the operations of a school, he also understands the teaching and learning. More importantly, Keith is a person of integrity, honesty. He's a great listener, and he has a proven record in our district of high quality performance. So this evening, again, it's my recommendation to appoint Keith Devoe as Assistant Superintendent of Operations. And again, his responsibilities will expand to take on some of those responsibilities of Dr. Reinhorn. And by no means do I want you to think that Dr. Reinhorn can't handle those tasks and those responsibilities. She's done a tremendous job. However, my responsibility as a superintendent is to make sure that I'm maximizing people's expertise and making sure that they can really focus on where their passions are, where their expertise is, and making sure we're as efficient and effective as an organization. So at this point in time, I will turn it over to Keith to maybe say a few words, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Greg, and I really appreciate those kind words. I have to say that starting in this district as my first job teaching in 2000, it's been quite a journey. And having this opportunity to join the central office team in the last 10 months or 11 months, I guess now, it's gone by so quick, has been a tremendous challenge, but it's also been a tremendous honor. I really have learned a great deal in a very short amount of time. It's presented some challenges and the partnerships that have grown and fostered. I think I mentioned it today during a meeting. We really haven't had a chance to stop and think and really consider all the silver linings that have occurred in the last 11 months. And I really look forward to doing that with the team to reflect upon what we've learned and what we've garnered from it. I would be absolutely honored to take on this position. I'm humbled by it. Certainly will be things I need to learn, and I take that on willingly, just as it has been for the past 11 months. So I would certainly take these responsibilities seriously. They are important for the operational side of the district, from the finance pieces to the grant opportunities that are in front of us. We want to make sure we capitalize on all of that. And I know I'll be leaning on the other central office leaders for that, as well as the central office staff to help navigate all the twists and turns that it presents. But I would be honored to take on this position.
So at this time, are there any questions or comments from any board members? Please raise your hand. I have Dan Kalenda. Dan?
Hey, Joan, thank you. And no questions. I've gotten to know Mr. Devoe for a number of years. So just a comment that I wholeheartedly support Mr. Martineau's suggestion. And for those who, haven't had the opportunity to work with Keith, maybe there will be some questions for him, but he is just the consummate professional and gentleman, works great with people, with families, with students. And I would be honored to make that motion to move that we support and approve him as the Assistant Superintendent of Operations when ready, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would also echo your same sentiment. I haven't had as many years tenure of getting to know Keith, but he's just wowed me with all his knowledge and his professionalism and his educational background and just his wisdom in getting us through these hard times that we've had during this pandemic. So I am just pleased to have him with our districts and knowing that even in this position, he'll be offering, as in the past position, his current one, is that he's been offering his wisdom and educational expertise to the students of Northborough and Southborough. The next, and Dan, I'll come back to you for the motion. The next one I have is Kelly Gannett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think Keith has been doing amazing things for our district so far. When he was a principal, I heard amazing things about him, and he's, definitely shown in his position as the district a director of operations. So I definitely think he could handle the job and the tasks, and I'm full-heartedly, I agree, I support him with that. My only concern would be is, I know it's a new position, so I don't know, is this something that the public would want to see or needs to see being going out for? Or since we are just kind of rebranding and repurposing like the position and expanding it, if that's unnecessary. So I just wanted to make sure that that's, not something that somebody might, down the line come back with being like, wait, that's not cool. But as Keith as a person, as Keith as a assistant superintendent, 2 thumbs up for me. So
Thank you. Joan, could I just comment? So just a quick comment. So thank you, Kelly. I think that is a fair question. One of my responsibilities as the superintendent of the district is to attract and retain high quality people who have a lot of skill and can basically get any job they want in terms of whether it's assistant superintendent or superintendent. Keith falls under that category. And, I think we have an all-star on the team, and I would not want to lose him to another district, and have interviewed a lot of folks for assistant superintendent and worked with assistant superintendents of operations, and have don't hesitate with my recommendation one bit.
Okay, thank you. Roger Challen?
I don't have any questions, but I would like to add, I guess, my comments about feeling that Keith is the right person for this job. I can certainly echo, so other than Paul and Kathleen, who were on the Southborough committee for a number of years, I probably have worked longer with Keith, obviously, since he was the principal, at Trottier, for maybe more years than most of the rest of the folks here tonight. And I can certainly vouch for his capability, his professionalism, his work ethic, and as Greg mentioned, his integrity. I can probably add just a couple of things. I do think I recall early on, I think I recall Keith mentioning at a public meeting that I wasn't quite as bright as the 6th grader that had just presented a robot that was actually, and demonstrated that the robot, could solve a Rubik's Cube. So I left that thinking that I was also impressed with Keith's frankness and his wisdom. So I would like to throw my full support towards Keith in this position. And I think he's clearly demonstrated to all of us that moving from one position to another, he's demonstrated he really does that, without a hiccup. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Roger. Kamali?
I have a question in terms of the title separation, as Keith is being proposed for direct assistant superintendent of operations. What would the title of the other role change or stay the same for Stephanie? You're on mute, Greg.
So Stephanie's job description in title would change. However, I'm not presenting that this evening. I will bring that back at a later time. So the job position, or Stephanie's title, would be Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning.
Okay.
And again, Stephanie's under contract right now with a specific job title. So Stephanie and I would have to sit down and have some conversations, but that is the plan.
Okay.
And just, can I just say one more thing? And Stephanie and I have had, and Keith have had many conversations. This plan and this conversation has not been in isolation. It's not the Greg Martineau plan. It's been a plan that Christine Johnson and I had discussed in terms of organization and what makes sense in terms of efficiency. And it's also conversations we've had as a central office leadership team around what do we need to be successful in our roles.
Okay. So thank you for that explanation. I think that I just wanted to comment that I agree with looking at this from a notion of retaining great talent. If you do a quick check, just in Massachusetts, there's between 80 and 150 openings for assistant superintendent. And so there's, just to kind of bring that to everyone's attention. And also, I think that the proposed salary is within the correct range of what we'd want to do, especially since it's budget neutral. That's another perk. And for the short time that I've really, both being on the Southborough board and then as a resident and with my children being part of the school system, everything that I know of Keith has been involved with operations. And so just to kind of shoot out a few things that I recall, you have the great bus debacle of 2019. You have the school start time proposals. The way that you presented that information early in July, that was really great. And I know that there was a lot of back work to that. Then you have the lunch coordination for during COVID, the classroom coordination and spacing and air filtration and all of that, and the boiler and various facility updates. So all of those things just off the top of my head are very operational, and I think they've worked out successfully. And so I support segmenting the roles and keeping Keith focused in that area.
Thank you, Kamali, for your great comments. Paul Desmond?
Thank you. I guess I'll pile on here. I mean, I've known Keith for, I guess, about 10 years since I joined the Southborough board, and both of my kids went through Troutier, and I just don't have enough good things to say about him. I mean, I think, as has been said, he's a consummate professional. I can't imagine getting thrust into your current job, Keith, and having a more challenging year, and you've come through it with flying colors, in my view. I just had two questions. One, I noticed the job requirement requires a superintendent licensure. I assume you have if you had been going for the assistant job, which I think is the same license. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the other question was for Stephanie, which I think we just sort of adjusted, but I would just like to hear what you think of this plan. And, I've seen you smiling through a lot of this, so it's safe to assume you're not terribly upset with stuff being taken off your plate.
I think your assumptions are correct. As Greg mentioned, this is something that I've been involved in conversations we've all been talking about, and we all have a lot on our plates, and the more kind of focused we can be, and the more targeted we can be in working to our own expertise and talent, I think the more we get out of everyone. And this will certainly allow me to go deeper in some of the work that I'm already involved in by having more time to put into it, which I'm excited about. And also, so I'll stop there.
I'll just add, Stephanie, your job, the job, even without those responsibilities shifting to Keith, is a tremendous lift. So it is still significant.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
All right, next we have Kathleen Paluchko.
Okay, since Roger threw me under the bus, I guess I've known Keith longest in this crowd. My kids didn't have him as a teacher, but all the kids in my neighborhood had him as a teacher. I knew him as assistant principal, as principal of Troutier, and obviously in the central office position. And the one thing I will say is, I mean, he just does an awesome job no matter which position he has been in here in Southborough and in the district. And if you look at it from a 360 perspective, the parents love him. Anybody he's worked for loves him and wants to constantly promote him. Everybody who works for him loves him. And as a school committee member, I have attracted a lot of very critical kinds of parents. And even the most critical parents have just the highest things to say about him. So I just can't even imagine a better person for this position. And I think you all know that just based on what you've seen of his performance just in the few months that he's been in this position. So that's it. Congratulations, Keith.
Thank you, Kathleen, for the great comments also. Kelly Gannett?
Thank you. I just wanted to add one other thing to Greg, that I'm so happy seeing this move with our district in this direction, having a central superintendent and then 2 separate assistant superintendents. I think with the volume of our district and the complexity of our district, I think that this is like going in such a great direction for our community to have this separation and this going forward. So I just wanted to add that also.
Thank you. Paul Bucka and then Kamali.
Thank you, Joan. Yeah, Kelly, I think you hit the nail on the head there. We've been talking for, I don't know, a few years now about trying to kind of reorganize central office in a way that, you know, made it, a better, more efficiently functioning organization. And I think that this is a giant step towards making that happen and kind of sharing the workload in an appropriate way. Keith, dealing with all the operational challenges of the pandemic, it's really been trial by fire, and certainly we have a terrific candidate there. But kudos to Greg for kind of pulling off this reorg and staffing it with the right people. So looking forward to this.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for that perspective. Kamali?
I just want to offer for anyone that is either viewing with this or will view it later, that to look on the positive here by having this segmentation. There's been a lot of key learnings and lessons around teaching and maybe improvements to curriculum and the way that we teach and go into more modern technology. And so you'll have someone that's going to be like laser focused on that instead of having to spread across, multiple areas that, now Keith would be more focused on because he would just handle the operational piece, and there would be someone handling the teaching and curriculum piece. So just wanted to just kind of, if there's anyone that's a little bit skeptical why we're making a decision like this in light of all the other things that need to be discussed, I think there's a positive there, and that's it. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Paul Bucka, do you have another question or comment? Okay. In conclusion, I think Kamali said it best in your choice of words, Kamali, when you said this is budget neutral, in which it is. And then also tagging on to what Kelly said and Paul Bucka, is that we had 2 studies. The latest one, the most recent, goes back when it was not the renovation to Algonquin Regional High School. And we had an outside firm come in and look at the organization of the administration and look at an organizational chart, and told us that in the administration, compared to other regional districts, that we were very light. But at the time, due to the budget constraints, we were not able to fill the position of having more than just one assistant superintendent. So it's been many times, probably have to dust off that study that was done before the renovation of the current Algonquin Regional High School. So I applaud Greg and Stephanie for taking on this initiative. I think Greg has attached in an email the organizational chart, the current one, and also the one that would come in if the vote is successful tonight. And I think that it shows the taking in even some of the things of that old study, but even in the educational realm that we're in today. And I think it's going to make a very well and a very strong administrative staff at the Near East School for all three districts. So I'm going to go back, seeing that there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go back to Dan. And Dan, I have a motion, but you can change it if you would like. I have a motion, if you'd like to make it. I move that we appoint Mr. Keith Lavoie as Assistant Superintendent of Operations with a starting date of Monday, February 22nd, 2021, and with a 3-year contract.
Is exactly my motion, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. So motion was made by Dan Kalenda for the region. Is there a
Seconded for the region.
second by Paul
For the region.
Baca? Is there any further discussion? This is a regional vote right now. Karen Ayers, roll call vote. Karen?
Yes.
Paul Baca?
Yes.
Chris Covino?
Yes.
Paul Desmond?
Yes.
Kathleen Highland?
Happily, yes.
Thank you. Kathy Key?
Yes, congratulations, Keith.
Dan Kalenda?
Yes.
Shauna Shea?
Yes.
Kathleen Paluchko?
Yes.
And myself, yes, it passes unanimous. And now I'd like to turn it over for a vote for Chairman LaBelle for Northborough, and then Chairman Roger Chown for Southborough.
Would anybody like to make the same motion?
I would make the motion on behalf of Northborough, the same motion as the region. Kelly Gannett.
Seconded, Lauren Bailey Jones.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take a roll call vote. Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Gannett?
Yes.
Mrs. Tagliaferri?
Yes.
And myself, Keith LaBelle, yes. The motion passes unanimously for the Northborough School Committee.
I would like to entertain that same motion from one of the members of the Southborough School Committee, if they'd be so kind.
I would be honored to make the same motion. I second the motion. Kamali.
Moved by Katura, seconded by Kamali. Is there any discussion from any of the committee members? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Jen?
Yes.
Katura?
Yes.
Kamali?
Yes.
And I vote yes, so the motion passes unanimously.
So congratulations, Keith, as Assistant Superintendent of Operations. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just Keith, I didn't tell you this, but the Assistant Superintendent of Operations reports to work at 5:30 a.m. every day. Actually, I think it's 5 a.m.
Sounds about
But
right.
I think you already do that.
I did this morning.
I was going to suspect that means he gets to sleep later than he does now, but
Not quite.
Okay, going on to our agenda. The next item that we have on our agenda is the appointment of the Northborough Southborough Regional School District Procurement Officer. This will be a vote only of the region. This is just for the regional district for the procurement officer. For the Northborough K-8 and Southborough K-8, the towns, your respective towns, take care of this under their budget and under their jurisdiction. So this is just for the region. I'll turn it over to you, the Superintendent Martineau.
Thank you. So again, the regional school district is considered its own entity, similar to the town of Southborough and the town of Northborough. And as a result is required to have a mass certified public purchasing official. So Becky Pellegrino has been taking the MCPPO course, which she has successfully completed. And I am recommending that the school committee appoint Becky Pellegrino as our Chief Procurement Officer. and her responsibilities will be related to buying, purchasing, renting, or otherwise acquiring supplies and services of all departments in the district. She also has the authority to delegate. So one of the areas we're working on in the central office is making sure we have cross-training, cross-functionality. Keith Devoe has also gone through the MCPPO course. He also has his MCPPO certification. Becky, again, will be the chief CPO, and as a result, we'll be able to delegate some of her responsibilities under her authority. So at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions and hear from the committee.
Paul Bucka?
So there's not really a chief procurement officer position per se, like you would see in, I don't know, a publicly traded company where there's someone who's responsible for supplies and procurement of services and the like. This is like an honorarium or a title or something that gets attached to Becky's current title. And then, I don't know, it's a certification or of some such that she needs to kind of maintain over the years, or once you're CPO worthy, are you CPO worthy for the rest of your career? Or, I guess would be one of my questions. And then the second would be, then we name Becky that, and then she immediately delegates it to Keith, who also is CPO worthy. Not sure why we don't just name Keith CPO. So I'm just a little confused. I'm sure you can straighten me out.
So I'll speak to the job description. So as part of Becky's job description as Director of Finance, she is listed as the CPO as one of her responsibilities. And again, it is different in our organization. Previous directors of finances in our district were the CPO. Where the reason why we asked Keith to pursue it was so we had that cross-functionality in case Becky let's say Becky retired. We would have someone in the district who could step into that position. Just in terms of the responsibilities Becky has, she oversees all the contracts and the procurement of those contracts. She is what I consider the gatekeeper for me. I rely on her to keep it organized. However, in Keith's role as Assistant Superintendent of Operations or Director of Operations, just by the nature of his work, he's doing a lot of procuring. So contracting for custodial supplies, contracting for larger projects such as the Finn Boiler project, and that allows Becky to delegate to him.
So
if I could just,
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add one quick thing to that also, Paul. So in order for our district to actually issue a request for proposals, you do need to have an appointed CPO. Without that position being appointed, then you're only able to do like an invitation for bids. So it kind of limits the procurement that you're able to do. So that's one of the requirements of this position. And I can say that, Keith and I work so closely together, throughout this whole process. It's nice to have two people who have that knowledge and have that ability to do the procurement, to do the bids, to do the RFP, because we've been through the class and we both understand the limits even though we're dealing maybe in different areas of the district.
Sure. So a follow-up, if I could, Joan?
Sure. Yes, Paul.
So why don't we name them both CPOs? Is there a reason why you can only have one, or?
According to the state, you can only appoint one person, and yes.
Yeah, so we have to report our CPO to the office of the Inspector General. So one person gets appointed.
Becky won the coin flip. Is that what happened? All right, thank you.
Okay, seeing that there aren't any other questions or comments, I would like to entertain a motion to appoint Rebecca Pellegrino as who is the Director of Finance, as the Chief Procurement Officer, CPO, for the Northborough Southborough Regional School District.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so it was made by Dan?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dan. Seconded by Paul Bucca. Any other discussion? Seeing none, this is a roll call vote. Karen Ayers,
Yes.
Paul Bucca,
Yes.
Chris Covino,
Yes.
Paul Desmond,
Yes.
Kathleen Highland,
Yes.
Kathy Key,
Yes.
Dan Kalenda,
Yes.
John O'Shea,
Yes.
Kathleen Paluchko,
Yes.
and myself. Yes, it passes unanimous. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Becky. Going on to the next agenda item, we have the legal counsel interviews. We have 3 that we will be hearing from tonight. But before we begin that, I would just like to review the process of how we're going to be doing this, doing the legal counsel interviews. We have a 30-minute time frame for each of the firms. First, each firm will provide an introduction presentation to the committees. Second, Heather Richards will be posing questions from the superintendent's administrative team. Then in the last segment, the school committees have approximately 8 minutes for any follow-up questions. So that we can get the questions, I will ask for 1 from Northborough School Committee, 1 from Southborough School Committee, and 1 from the Regional School Committee for each of the 3 firms. I'd like to turn it now over to Superintendent Martineau.
May I ask a process question?
Sure.
Thank you. So through the chair, so as I understand it, we'll have 10 to 15 minutes for the firms to present, and then Heather will ask some questions, and then there will be some time left over, I think 8 minutes for any school committee members to ask within that 8-minute period.
Correct.
And I'm presuming that the half an hour allocated for a firm is one in which the other firms do not are not witnessing that interview. These are separate and discrete interviews, or are they? I guess because it's public, they could be watching. So firm number 2 could have seen firm number 1's interview, and firm number 3 could have seen both of the 2 previous firms' interviews.
That is correct, Roger. And I'll just comment that I'm not asking for a decision from the committees this evening.
I understand.
So that would allow all the firms to watch the presentations. But again, I think your point is the first firm, the second and third firms could potentially have a response to a question that, could hear the questions being asked and have some preparation time. The first firm did not.
That was really kind of my point, but I guess that it is what it is. All right. Thank you very much.
And also in the packets that we receive electronically, there is one from each of the firms for you to review. So you do have, as Greg said, we will not be taking a vote tonight. The next vote will take place in March at the next joint school committees meeting that we're going to have. Is that correct, Greg?
That is correct.
Okay. So it gives you some time to review the linked materials. Okay, I turn it over to you, Greg, and to Heather.
Sure. So I'll just provide some context. It is one of the responsibilities of the school committee is to employ legal counsel. For many years, the school committees have employed Brody Hardoon Perkins Keston, LLP. I think we've used the firm for over 2 decades. And I think that it is always good practice to bring forward options. It's been some time since the committee has interviewed other firms to see what services exist. We typically use the firm for general and labor counsel. And I will add that we've added a lot of capacity at central office, and we have a lot of talented people. And one person who's very talented and brings a lot of expertise is Heather Richards. She's not only an HR guru, but she's also a lawyer, and we've capitalized on that expertise. So I've asked Heather to kind of facilitate the questions for the firms, because again, she has that background and expertise. And I will turn it over to Heather for some additional information.
Thank you, Mr. Martineau. I would like to introduce Attorney Greg Pagnini and Attorney Lenny Keston from Brody, Hardoon, Perkins, and Keston, LLP, if they could be promoted so that they are able to present to the committees, please.
They should both be here.
I see myself, so I know I am here. Hello there, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, and I do see Lenny Keston, who I think is just trying to unmute himself. I can see him talking.
All right. And Greg, I think that we will allow you to, you have a PowerPoint, correct? That you would like
no, we're just going to present in terms of the topics that were requested of us to talk a little bit about both those topics and our firm.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Well, good evening. I'm going to start out. Greg and I talked about it, and since he decided I should talk first, since I'm senior, and I am quite a bit older than he is. First, I want to congratulate Assistant Superintendent Devoe. And I do have to tell you that unlike him, not everyone likes me. I heard the comments you made about him, and especially given what we do, I am the litigator, not the only one, but I'm a litigator in the firm. I'm a trial lawyer. I have been involved in education my whole life. I had a life before I became a lawyer. And I know that being a lawyer is just a job, not a title. So I was a middle school teacher in Boston, during busing, teaching a substantially separate class. From that job, I went to work at Walpole Prison, which was easier. Then I have a master's in education. And eventually I realized that arguing was my life, so I went to law school. In my career, I've been at it for 37 years. In my career, I've handled a lot of important education cases involving cases. One went up to the Supreme Judicial Court on the issue of the duty of school system to protect students. And yes, this school, you have been represented by, for 30 years, you started out with Naomi Stoneberg, who was at that point a solo practitioner. We worked with her a lot. Eventually, she joined our firm. And now she's retired, although she's still a resource, but she's retired. And Gregor has been with us for 12 years, this 12th year. And he was mentored by Naomi. He's been doing this. We have 16 lawyers. We provide a lot of backup and a lot of experience. We, a year ago, hired a lawyer who is a Title IX specialist, who's available. I believe that the strength we provide, one of the main strengths we provide is we actually do the trials as well. And as a lawyer, when you're looking at, as an HR person, we're looking at those decisions, when you're making decisions on your level, if we know how it's going to look at the end, if it has to go to trial, if it has to go to arbitration. And we prepare for that at the beginning. So what we try to always do is keep you out of trouble. And I always tell people, call us early. It's all too often, but we represent a lot of municipalities. We do police departments, school departments, selectmen, God help us, school committees. And I so often ask them, I wish you'd called me before you made that decision. Or my favorite line is, and then you did what? And you thought this was a good idea because in the end, you don't control it. The superintendent has great power. The principals have power, and it's great. You get to do it. But in the end, as you know, as anyone knows, in the end, if somebody takes you to court, takes you to arbitration, it's not going to be your decision. And then you have to explain it. So we have that depth and we have that strength. And we have been doing it for a long time. We're 16 lawyers. We have a great location, not that it matters anymore since we're all in our living room, but we're in the Back Bay of Boston. We've really enjoyed working with you, and I sacrificed my knee for you. None of you know this, but some years ago I came to a meeting, then Naomi and I stopped and we got dinner, and I stood up and my knee was locked. And I have always blamed you for that. And I ended up with a knee replacement, which I hardly recommend, but it all began with a school committee meeting. So anyway, as I say, we have a lot of backup. What we really like is helping people, advising them to keep them out of trouble. And Gregor has the heavy oar, so I'll turn it over to Greg Pagnini.
Thanks, Lenny. So I wanted to touch on kind of first our approach in terms of working with clients, and then second, a little bit more specifically about some of the topics that were identified that I think the committees are a bit interested in sort of hearing about. Lenny certainly, I think, mentioned it, that one of the things that I think we really seek to bring in terms of how we work with a client is to be preventative in both thinking about upfront what kind of issues could be potentially problematic down the line, and always keeping in mind how that could play out, because we are perfectly comfortable, if it ever got there, to be in the courtroom or in a mediation or in an arbitration, defending the district. But that's something that we certainly try to identify and work with any client to sort of think about upfront. And I'm going to steal kind of a phrase that Heather Richards has used when I've been talking with her before, which is, and I liked it when she first said it, we try to be a thought partner in terms of both looking at the legal aspect of any issue, but also identifying kind of what context it's in and thinking through, practically speaking, solutions that, of course, they're going to be involving legal issues because that's what we do. But anytime we're working with a school district, the reality of the matter is that we're looking at a larger set of questions in terms of how we got here and other variables that are at play. And we like to try to think through with any client what other factors are involved and what might be the best solution to the problem at hand. So those are things that we like to converse about and think about with any client in terms of trying to constructively approach any of the issues that are thrown our way. The topics that the committees identified are all topics that or issues that we see regularly. So I thought I would just quickly kind of go through some of them or all of them to identify or talk a little bit about hot topics that we're seeing and the kinds of issues that are sort of percolating, as well as the ones that we've had experience in. So employment litigation is probably, of all of the things that have been identified, what we do the most. We see a lot of MCAD or EEOC claims. We're in the MCAD regularly, and they tend to involve ADA and FMLA issues. We've been part of public ethics investigations in the past. We've conducted all sorts of mediations and arbitrations, be it in state, federal court, or through labor issues, sitting down and having to arbitrate a grievance, et cetera. On the labor side of things, although it hasn't been so much with this district, we represent numerous districts at the table. We have as with identifying kind of issues or any issues, we try to be proactive in talking to a client about what it is they're trying to achieve at the table, and sort of setting forth a negotiation strategy to achieve that. Certainly, it's been the case that we might get to impasse with some clients and have to go through the DLR, et cetera. I don't think it's something that anyone likes doing, and it's something that we try to avoid to the extent that we can. But I think the reality is that sometimes necessitated both or either by the tone of the negotiations or the issues in the negotiation. And if that happens, then certainly we're comfortable going forward with doing that as a strategy. We recognize that that's something that we would have to do or need to do in order to sort of get what the district might want to achieve. In terms of student and staff rights and discipline, we field a lot of questions from various districts regarding both not only the process for disciplining staff, but also the appropriateness of various kinds of discipline. So, just being that thought partner for talking about, is it a 1 day, is it a 3 day type of suspension, for example, or what might make the most sense. And I think realistically speaking, that's really something that needs to be a conversation, because although we can bring a perspective about what kind of disciplines we've seen upheld in the law, it also has to be done in the context of you folks knowing the personnel at hand and trying to sort of think about what makes the most sense in any kind of a situation. So that's something that we certainly try to talk through with any client. In terms of student discipline, we've defended bullying cases. We've been or had the opportunity to look at numerous kinds of Title VI, Title VII, Title IX issues and questions. Certainly Title IX is, I'm sure many, if not all of you know, is sort of a burgeoning area right now. There were recent regulations that came out that sort of prescribed both how you have to do an investigation and redefined a lot of the relevant terms. So that's going to cause a lot of litigation in the future if it hasn't already. But that's going to be one of the things, along with bullying, that we foresee as being something that's going to be a continued sort of hot topic in the law, in at least the years to come. We also do regularly a lot of review of contracts. We've done it for your district in terms of looking at vendor contracts and trying to issue spot if there are any types of phrases in there or provisions or language that could be problematic. Most recently, we've been having a discussion about the COVID testing and the vendors that are coming in, which is, as I've learned, a world unto itself, but it's fascinating and also something, of course, that we want to be able to get in because it's ultimately helpful. But that's something that we certainly field in terms of the kinds of questions quite frequently. And we also get a lot of questions regarding policies, both from this district and others, in terms of being asked to do a policy review, or more simple questions about the open meeting laws application, public records, responses, and certainly like to help with any of the questions that arise in those contexts, as well as, and this kind of goes to the last, I think, thing that the committee has asked about, professional development or providing any kind of seminars, et cetera, which is something that we certainly do. Pre-COVID, I had the opportunity to provide an overview or presentation to some members of the committees about open meeting law and public records, and that's certainly something that we look forward to be able to do in the future. I remember, for example, in that presentation that there were a number of really good questions about social media, and to the extent that the committees had a topic that they identified that we want to present on, that's certainly something that we're happy to do, or in the alternative, come in and provide some kind of a regular update on X, Y, or Z areas of law, or meet with administrators to talk about questions they have or certain topics. Although there are certain topics like, for example, the open meeting law that we present on regularly, we're more than happy to work with a client if there's a more specified issue or topic that they'd like to have a presentation on, to sort of issue spot or sort of talk through things that might be pertinent to that district. So those are the kinds of things that or issues that we see. I think I just would want to reiterate, sort of in closing, something that Lenny said in the beginning, which is one of the things that we really try to seek to bring with any client is really trying to work with the folks that we're talking to on a regular basis, to try to get to know both, of course, them, but the district and the kinds of issues that the district is seeing, to try to be able to sort of forecast where it might be going, and to understand when something comes up, the things that have happened in the past in order to sort of, again, be preventative about other issues and where this might go. So that's us. I guess if there are questions, we're happy to field them.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions that I'd like to ask you. And if you could please share with us a complex and public legal matter that you have handled.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to field this one. So we received a case in the office representing another district where there was, and there's a larger factual backdrop, so I don't think it probably makes sense to take as much time as I'd like to get into it because it's sort of fascinating. But there was a free speech issue that was brought up in front of the DLR in which the district lost, and then was brought into a federal litigation that we ended up having. And it was a federal court matter, so it's a public case. We litigated it, and the question was whether or not there was a First Amendment violation by virtue of what had happened essentially at the DLR. And it was, in my view, a pretty fascinating question, not one you don't want to necessarily have in the Massachusetts courts, which are a bit more liberal. But we litigated that, and that was disposed of on summary judgment by the plaintiff, basically by virtue of the DLR decision. And if you want the reference, I can give that to you. It's Maher, M-E-A-G-H-E-R, is the name of the plaintiff that we represented the school district, the Andover School District in that case.
And can I give you one? I don't know if you know it, it's called Brum versus Dartmouth. I don't know if you know that case, but it's a seminal case on the school committees, on a school's duty to protect. It was a tragic case where this young man was shot at the Dartmouth High School. And the lawsuit was against the school committee and the school. The case went up to the Supreme Judicial Court. And I was part of the argument to argue. And I remember I told them, I said, if you allow this, it's a terrible fact, schools will go bankrupt in trying to prevent this stuff. But that was one of them.
Okay, thank you. Now, if you could please share with us your experience with advising on complex ethics issues or public records laws.
So we field public records issues and questions fairly regularly. And I think it's hard to comment on, I can't think of one that's sort of a kind of issue that we get regularly because it's a pretty wide array of questions that we get. But it seems to me it really dovetails against confidentiality a lot, ends up being one of the issues that we have to deal with quite commonly. On the ethics sides of things, I think I had mentioned when I spoke a little bit earlier that we've been involved in a number of different ethics investigations and have had the opportunity to look at a lot of different 258 issues as they apply to, for example, an administrator who was alleged to have used a number of district funds and materials in ways that they weren't supposed to, and provided a legal opinion on that. And so that's obviously a delicate matter, but we are perfectly comfortable doing that and trying to balance both, of course, what the law mandates, but trying to understand kind of the human side of it too, in terms of how someone may have put themselves in that position.
Heather, I'm one of the few people that's actually done an ethics trial, a hearing. It never happens. When we did ours, the ethics commission staff had to figure out how to conduct a hearing because they'd never done it. And we won. But the conflict of interest is always an issue, and you're always dealing with it, and you've got to be careful. It's a landmine. Mm-hmm. Especially with school committee members who have kids in the school, dealing with the superintendent. Those are delicate, and you have to watch yourself.
Right. And we're seeing more and more decisions come down.
Yep.
All right. If you could please share with us a little bit about professional development and how you ensure that your clients are informed about the latest regulations and laws that are coming forward.
So we put together bulletins on issues as they come up. We also look to districts to identify things that they think they could benefit by in terms of some kind of a presentation or information on. But for example, the Title IX regulations that came out, we put together a bulletin that talked about the modifications in there just to provide sort of a primer to clients about that. But I think we find too, for a lot of clients, some of them pretty quickly can get up to speed with or without us on certain subjects. And then on others, we'll look to us to provide them an overview about how it's going to affect them operationally, which certainly is something that we're more than happy to do.
Okay, great. And we have a very good relationship with our associations. And in negotiations, we approach that with an interest-based bargaining approach, a very friendly rapport. So please share with us your approach when bargaining does not go favorably.
That's never the case. Yeah, so it's interesting in terms of trying to size up the landscape of any negotiation, because ultimately it comes down to the people that are in the room. And you have to read the personalities. You have to understand both the personalities on your team, but on the union negotiations team as well. And try to figure out, in my view, which of those members are the ones that are bringing sort of the heaviest axe to grind, or if it's actually an issue that is something the union sort of writ large, be it either the union's team or the union en masse, truly are invested in, either because it's something the MTA is sort of top-down driving, or if it's something that's more specific to the district. So the contours of that, I think, are very much district to district. But my approach is always to, in the negotiating room, first, frankly, to just try to establish a relationship of trust with the union, because I think that goes a very long way to be able to bargain with them and have a relationship where you can exchange information where one side is believing what the other side is telling them. Because once that relationship comes apart a little bit, I think that's where, in my experience, the wheels tend to come off in the negotiations room. But ultimately, if that's not something that can be mended simply by speaking to one or more people, at the table, or with an MTA rep, et cetera, or whoever the rep may be, I recognize, or I think we certainly recognize, that it may be something that would have to go to the DLR. But my view is our approach should always be to first try to come up with a way of approaching the people first, and establishing that relationship of trust to be able to bargain that way, rather than kind of come in with the expectation that we're going to end up at the DLR anyway.
Okay. All right. And one last question. Please tell us about a time, or tell us when a client comes to you with not a real solid position. How do you advise them?
Yeah, that's difficult, because of course we are always going to want to be an advocate for the district and an advocate for what the district might be trying to achieve. But certainly that's not always something that is necessarily, you might run into legal implications if you don't. So I think something we try to do is have an upfront conversation about, well, look at the options and let's see how these options can play out. so someone can understand that if they were to choose a path that we may not be advocating for, they would at least understand what the implications of that would be, and to have sort of that delicate conversation where we can at least talk about that, so we can perhaps steer them in the direction that we're hoping that they might go. And if not, then at least recognize the pitfalls of the alternate direction.
Can I talk about that? Because it's one of my many principles in life. You're paying us to give you the best advice. Now, not paying us to tell you that you're right. Ideally, the two will work together. But we're, leading a client down a disastrous road, because that's what they want. They really want to terminate this person, even though they can't. It is our role to advise you, and you pay us to advise you, and we always will. We will tell you the truth. If you want to go on, sure, but you got to understand, we can't stop you. So when your client has a difficult position, yeah, it's difficult. It's a difficult conversation, and I find that a lot of law firms don't have it. I pick up litigation of things that have gone bad with other law firms in advising, and it's your job to do it. It's your job it's our job to tell you whether what you're doing is right or wrong, whether your case is good or bad. And if it's bad, it's a tough conversation, but it needs to be had. That's what you deserve.
Thank you very much. All right, Madam Chair, would you like to facilitate the next round of questions from the committees?
Yes, and I'd like to, through you, Heather or Greg, how many minutes do we have left in this segment to ask if there's any follow-up from school committee?
It looks like about 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Okay. So I will take Northborough first. Is there any Northborough member that has a follow-up question? Please raise your hand if you have a follow-up question. Northborough? Okay, I don't see any for Northborough. Southborough? Any Southborough K-8 member that has a follow-up question? Roger Challen.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the presentation so far. I'm curious, do you view, and this is for either of you gentlemen, municipal labor law, and perhaps even within that, school labor law, as really a kind of a sub-practice, if you will? And if you do, just mention a couple things that make it very different from, I guess, the broader area of labor law.
I don't quite understand. I mean, it depends on the contracts. I mean, we deal with a lot of municipalities, other than schools as well. And there you deal with contractual issues and various labor obligations and civil service, or you have under the school system, you have those rules. So they're different, but in essence, the situation is the same. You have to know what the rules are and how the facts apply to the rules. Greg?
Yeah, Roger, it sounds like you're making a distinction, if I'm hearing what you're getting at, between school law versus other public sector kind of labor law, so other kinds of types of entities. And if I'm understanding that correctly, then I think the main distinction that I can think of, other than the personnel, which I think has a large play in sort of how things are handled, is simply that there's this, by statute, there are a number of differences that are more particular to school law that you have to keep an eye out for when you're negotiating. So a number of things that you might have to keep in mind. But as I understand your question, that's what I'd say the main distinction is, as I think of it.
No, I think that was helpful to me. Thank you both.
Okay, for the region, we have Paul Becca, who would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Joan. This goes back a bit, but I'm thinking Mr. Keston, as a founding member, maybe you can maybe this is directed more towards you. One of the biggest issues that's happened in the district over the course of my tenure here has been all of the issues surrounding the massive renovation of the high school. Can you talk a little bit about our attorney's role in that whole process and your recollections of how it turned out? If you weren't there, then I get it. But
I don't think so. That might have been handled by Naomi.
Well, it was certainly it was a while ago. So it's about a 12-year-old building, I'd say now at this point in time that we've done. I don't know when you guys merged with Naomi or hired her. Was that before? I mean,
no, I think I'm trying to remember. It's right around that time, maybe a little before. But she was, she was solo.
Okay,
I mean, she did her own stuff. I
thought if you guys were involved, you'd have some insights. Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay.
Can I just comment? I believe that was the municipal legal counsel of Northborough and Southborough, not directly related to the school department, if I'm correct. I did have a conversation with John Care about it at one point.
Okay. All right, thanks, Greg. I mean, it was a mess for a little while. All right, thanks.
That's the unfortunate part of it's not fortunate, unfortunate. We're only called in typically when things are going bad. Things are going good. No client calls you up and says, just checking in, how you doing? So the more I know people, the more I know stuff, the more they've had problems.
Okay, thank you. And since we have some time left, I have one last question from Southborough, and that is Kamali.
My question is, in the recent past, maybe 5 to 10 years, have you had any experience handling cases that have had to deal with claims of racial bias, sexism, xenophobia, and how have you worked with the clients, meaning the schools and the school systems on that, and do you see an uptick in those areas?
Yes. Is there an uptick? I think it's growing, but that issue has always been there. I mean, we've handled issues with students tormenting each other because of race. There was a horrible case where this group of students developed their own code word to insult their fellow students. And they said, well, we're not using any of the words you told us not to use. We're using a code word. You work on it through education. Oh, we also have a lot of, disability. We've had a number now cases of autistic children. Autistic children who are having issues in the schools being made fun of. It's bullying related to everything. I mean, I bring personal experience to it. I was an immigrant kid when I was in junior high school. I was an immigrant Jewish kid in a town that had never seen a Jewish person. It was middle school. And it was brutal. Luckily, and I'm 6'3", so I was able to sort of handle it. But I remember the jokes, and the comments. So yeah, we see a lot of those cases. You try to resolve them. You try to work with the person. I always talk about you don't want to fight them in court. If you don't have to, you try to fix the problem as best you can. But these are difficult times, and these are difficult issues. And yeah, it crops up a lot. We've dealt with a lot of these situations. We dealt with a complicated situation with a Palestinian group that wanted to make a presentation at a high school, and the parents objected. And it was really, people divided in the town about it. And what I always try to do is say, listen, you're all raising kids in this town, and you're living together. You need to try to work it out. And if you can't, you can't. But that's the approach I've always brought to it. It's brutal, but it happens. And as you know, kids are cruel. 14-year-old kids can be very cruel to each other, and we do the best we can.
Let me just add one thing, if I could, Kamali. So, Lenny, I think, spoke a bit towards those kinds of claims amongst kids, which is certainly something that we see, and I think it is an area of litigation in the bullying context that's growing, unfortunately. On the staff side of things, it can also be an issue. I participated in a course from the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination called the Train the Trainer course. So for those who aren't familiar with it, the MCAD, the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, is the state's anti-discrimination agency. And they offer a course where they train folks to be able to then go out and train, for example, administrators or supervisors in anti-discrimination and harassment preventative measures, which is something that we offer. We could come in and provide a training to folks because although I think it's certainly the case that everyone intends well, it's not always the case that people understand how words can always be perceived, and that kind of a training can cover that for folks and help to, again, mitigate the possibility that you might see those claims both among staff and students.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes the school committee questions. I'd like to turn it over now to Greg Martineau, Superintendent, and Heather.
So I just want to thank Gregor Pagnini for his counsel over the years. 30 years with a firm is a tremendous history. And Brody, Hardoon, Perkins, and Keston have represented the district well over those years. And I just again want to thank Greg for his commitment to the district in the past, and also thank you for your presentation this evening.
Thank you, Greg. I can honestly say it's been a pleasure representing the district for all the years that I have.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.
Good night.
Thank you all.
All right. So we have, Greg, did you want to take this or?
Heather, you can continue right along.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So we have our next firm joining us, Merrick O'Connell, Damali, and Luigi, and attorney Kim Rozak and attorney Stephen Mattis will be joining us. Let's see. Does Attorney Mattis have his video? Oh, there we go. All right. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. So as you know, we have about 15 minutes for you to present and share what you'd like to share with us. Did you have a PowerPoint or not?
Hi, good evening, Heather. No, we don't have a PowerPoint. We're just going to present orally.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and feel free to share about your firm.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us this evening. Stephen and I are happy to speak to you about our firm, Merrick O'Connell. I've been with the firm now for 21 years, and our firm has over 60 attorneys. Stephen can tell us how long he's been with the firm. He's also been with the firm a number of years. I practice in the areas of labor and employment exclusively. My practice is focused in that area, but I represent clients that are public sector, private sector, and not-for-profit. And in the public sector area, it includes school districts, regional school districts, single district schools, and as well as towns and municipalities. I will talk a little bit about the areas that I specialize in, and then I'll ask Stephen to speak about what he does, because what I think is, helpful with a firm like Merrick O'Connell is with a larger group of attorneys, you do have a greater breadth of area of expertise. Stephen is very expert in the areas of, procurement and bidding, open meeting law, public records, and school construction, for example. I don't know the first thing about those areas. I'm not going to become specialized in that, and I don't want to try to help you in the areas that I can't help you in. But I can help in some of the topics that you've asked for some commentary on is, generic or, employment law.
and then labor, and maybe as it pertains specifically to school districts, student and staff rights and discipline. I do work in that area as well, and I work with school committees in terms of developing policies, revising policies. I know that a lot of school districts use the MASC policies, and in my opinion, they're fine and they go so far, but I like to work with my clients to make them perfect for them. I want them to be their policies, not MASC's policies that you folks have developed. So as I said, that's kind of the breadth of the areas that I work in. And as I said a few seconds ago, with 60 attorneys, it's not just labor and employment. We also have attorneys that specialize in just general litigation. It sounds funny to say they specialize in general litigation, but that's all they do, is they do litigation, and they take cases that it could be that another attorney in our office has worked on certain aspect of it, it's turned into litigation, and then they carry it forward and they represent the client, state court, federal court. We also have attorneys that do corporate work, bankruptcy, ERISA benefits. Occasionally that can be an issue for school districts, and beyond. And so in my practice, I do a lot of administrative litigation. I personally do not handle court cases. With the breadth of work that I have in terms of clients, a lot of the day-to-day work I do is answering questions about specific issues. And I like to have time, and I need the time to be able to advise my clients. So I will do day-to-day advice, and I will handle administrative litigation. And in that sense, it's labor arbitrations and unfair labor practice charges. And today I spent 7 hours doing a virtual hearing at an arbitration. So as I say, I do a fair amount of that. I also do collective bargaining, and in that regard, I've done mediations as well. I have never had to go to an arbitration over a collective bargaining agreement, happy to say that. And in terms of collective bargaining, I think I'm also very successful in terms of avoiding down the road disputes that end up, in protracted contract negotiations that go on and on and on. Student and staff rights and discipline. I've handled a number of student discipline matters, one involving, I would say, perhaps the most interesting case and yet the most complex, and I would say at the same time unfortunate case, was one where the teacher had like a Google Meets type of opportunity for students to comment on the classroom computer screen. Somehow or other, that ended up in a situation where the student was threatening the teacher. And it was through an anonymous source, or it came up as an anonymous source. It was reported to the police, and they were able to identify, at least the police thought they were identifying the student, and we went through the protocol of the discipline and the internal processes and the hearings and so forth. As I said, that one was very protracted and complex and unfortunate because there was threats against the teacher. So philosophically, I think it's important for you folks to understand, what do I do? How do I separate myself from every other lawyer that you're going to see? Not just the people who came before me, but those after me and other people that you meet and other attorneys. I'd like to say that what I do for my clients is I get to know them. I get to understand who they are, what their issues are, what their risks tolerances are, where they want to push things, where they don't want to push things. If they're collaborative, then I'm collaborative. If they're not as collaborative and it's time to be a little bit more litigious, if that's the role I have to play, I'm going to play it. Predominantly, though, the most important thing I want to do for my clients is provide them options. I know that every lawyer you're going to speak to knows what the law is. They know generally, this is what you can do. This is how you do it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of attorneys just sort of rotely spit back information. Clients don't need that or want that. And they also don't want really, really long explanations for things. They kind of want you to jump to the point. They want you to explain it in appropriate terms, ones that they can understand, but you don't talk down to people. And you give them options. And I find that is so helpful. That's what my clients want to know. They want to know, well, what can I do? Well, you can do this. This is the likely down the road how this is going to unfold. You could do this. This is how this is going to unfold. At the same time, though, if my client does say to me, Kim, we've worked together for a while, or, this is what we're trying to accomplish. What do you think? What do you think we should do? I am willing to answer that question. I don't want to say to them, well, I gave you these options and it's up to you to choose. You do want to know. If you want to know what I think is right for the situation, I'm going to tell you that as well. I will always give you an answer. I will always give you a responsive answer, and I will be responsive to you in terms of responding to your needs and being available to you and being honest about what I think the situation calls for. Another thing that I would like to say before I turn over to Stephen, in my firm, we have, I should be able to know this off the top of my head. I was going to say, we have a number of attorneys. We have a lot who handle labor and employment laws, labor and employment law. And in terms of school work specifically, there are 5 attorneys that handle school law. So the benefit to our firm is, while we have specialists in special areas, we do collaborate. We ask each other questions. If I don't have a particular issue on my plate, somebody else might, but they will weigh in and ask me, what do you think about this? So we are constantly exchanging situations, advice, best practices. Another thing that we do for our clients is we do provide regular updates on legal changes, on new regulations. For example, I know for recently, one of the circulars we put out was the requirement about the increased live synchronous learning time that DESE passed the regulation saying, you got to have at least this many hours of live FaceTime, because some schools were not operating under that rubric. So we pass on that information regularly, and we want to make it available to our clients. So we do have that. We maintain that practice of staying on top of things and passing along information to our clients. So as I said, while there's a number of items on your list of topics that you wanted some information on, I will turn this over to Stephen at this time so that he can talk to you about his area of expertise.
Good evening. Thank you, Kim. Good evening, members of the school committees. Can you all hear me well now? Okay, thank you. I told Kim I was going to introduce myself as Mr. Lavoie's brother and leave it at that, but I see he's still here, so I couldn't get away with that. But so my name is Stephen Medaus. I'm a partner at Myrick O'Connell. I'm a graduate of WPI and Suffolk Law School. I started my career in the City of Worcester Law Department, thinking I would always be a government lawyer. And the firm kind of lured me away. I learned because they wanted someone to handle municipal law. So I am town counsel for 3 towns, which is public record. So town of Shrewsbury, town of Holden, town of Boylston. I've been in Holden for my whole career. I've been town counsel in Boylston since 2007. I've been interim town counsel in a number of towns. I am district counsel for a number of water districts and sewer districts. So with that, I do an awful lot of procurement work, public procurement, Chapter 30B. I either prepare or review for procurement officers, like the newly appointed procurement officer, invitations for bid, usually RFPs, those are more complex. The requests for quotes sometimes with, there's another layer to that now than there used to be. 30B-16, interest in real estate. I've been dealing with that my whole career, and also public construction. I used to handle all the construction at Myrick O'Connell, both private and public, but my background, my strength is in public construction. Chapter 149, I've handled a number of school construction projects. The Mount View Middle School in Holden, with now the public construction law, you may know, was reformed in 2006, where we can do pre-qualifications of sub-bidders and general bidders. So those procedures, also designer selection law, of course, with contracting with architects. Chapter 149A, which was part of the reform, which allows for CM at risk method of construction, which, the classic cities and towns are always bound, and districts, by design, bid, build, which often led to disputes between the designer and the contractor, and the party in the middle trying to figure out who was correct was the owner, the awarding authority. The CM at risk method allows us to have a kind of partnership between the designer and the contractor early on, and that greatly decreases, in my view, the likelihood of disputes between those parties. So it's a great benefit to the owner. Town of Shrewsbury is currently constructing the new Beal School. It's a $90 million elementary school. I reviewed all the docs for that, all the procedures. We had land from the Commonwealth to build that off of Lake Street. Also working on the disposition of the old Beal School in the center of town, with the town for that. In part of my 30B, I heard them mention early on about the school bus contracts. I was in that, I think the term was debacle. When COVID came, so I get a lot of work from school districts from our labor attorneys on procurement matters. I worked on suspending school bus contracts. There's a statute that we can't pay for services that aren't rendered, yet these school bus contractors were saying if they didn't get some payment, they would not be available whenever we called upon them to provide services. And so a lot of school districts had to get ahead of, in my view, DOR, DLS, local services, as to how we could make payments. They eventually caught up to allow us to find a way to continue those relationships. But that was an interesting exercise that COVID, another gift from COVID, I guess. So also, of course, in my career, open meeting law, public records law, conflict of interest law. I do have an associate who recently became a partner, Brian Falk, who I work closely with. He is town counsel in 3 towns as well, Clinton, Bolton, and Dunstable. He regularly monitors the Division of Open Government's rulings for open meeting law. And we also monitor the State Ethics Commission's decisions. And of course, representing so many towns and with our labor group, school districts, school departments, we often write conflict of interest opinion letters for the employee who has requested that, copy the State Ethics Commission. And then public records law. We field a lot of requests for public records and advise cities and towns on handling that with their records access officer. Trying to think if there's anything else that yeah, I've also been involved. I mean, this probably wouldn't, I'm hoping this isn't too much of an interest. Recently was involved with a 2-member district where they didn't approve the budget, and I had to attend a joint meeting called by the regional school committee a number of times, and the larger town kept voting down the regional school district budget until finally, I think it was the 3rd meeting when enough residents came out to adopt the budget. I've also, in the town of Holden, have been involved with, that's a 5-member regional school district where they did not get the requisite number of towns to approve the regional budget. This was quite a few years ago, but we drifted towards then DOE, now DESE, taking over, but managed to avoid that when one of the towns finally capitulated on the number. So I've had a lot of experience with that at town meetings and meetings called by the regional school committee. So with that, happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you very much. You had mentioned open meeting law. Could you please share with us an example of where you had a complex open meeting law situation with a client?
Sure. Well, I think the shifting to remote access and remote meetings has been not exactly seamless. I mean, we do also issue client alerts, and we were monitoring all the amendments, revisions that came out, either executive orders of the governor or then the legislation that followed. So we advised all our towns or government entities on how to comply with the new provisions that allow for remote access. We've had complaints of open meeting law violations that we've defended. You know, you first send the response to the complainant. If the complainant is not satisfied, they may then go to the Division of Open Government. And we've had some success defending actions or certainly avoiding the significant penalties that could be brought down by the Division of Open Government. It used to be an open meeting law. It was enforced by the district attorney, and that you could kind of negotiate better. Now with a bureaucracy in Boston, I often tell my clients it's not worth the risk, and make sure that, you know, it's properly posted. And if you're in doubt about executive session, don't do it. But Brian Falk in my firm has kind of been the expert on open meeting law and monitoring all the decisions that come out. And I think we do well in that area.
Okay, thank you. If you could please share with us a public, complex and public matter, a legal matter that you've handled and how you've represented a client.
So you're asking for one that's public, which would mean that in terms of the litigation that I do, which is ordinarily in the area of, as I said, administrative, so arbitrations, ULPs, those ordinarily are not treated as public. That's the vast majority of the work that I've done. I can think of one complex such case that started as a ULP and it did end up in the appeals court. So I suppose we can call that fair game because it would ultimately it's a public matter. It involved an early childhood coordinator at a school district I represent who was terminated. And one of the key issues in that case was whether or not that position was in the bargaining unit. She was treated as it being in the teacher's unit, but she had, in terms of job responsibility, all of the trappings of a supervisor. So I was making an argument that she, in fact, should not have been given the rights and remedies available to someone in the teacher unit. And we argued about that. And I think what made the case even more complex, frankly, was just opposing counsel. It was someone who was very skilled attorney. She was not going to drop an issue. She, litigated that case very well, very carefully, lots of documents. And my recollection is that at the Department of Labor Relations, we may have had some 8 days of hearing. As I said, we litigated not just the bargaining unit issue, but we had disputes over evidentiary issues, interlocutory issues. And for people who may not know what that means, it's we're arguing over a decision that was reached sort of intermediate, not at the final stage of the hearing. Could that be appealed? And as I said, that went on for at least 8 days. We did prevail in the decision ultimately, and then at the appeals court. To be honest with you, I'm not sure that was my most interesting complex case. I think as of late, most recently, and I'll just give you this for what I think is maybe even more suitable, was actually contract negotiations with another school district that wanted to end the bargaining unit of custodians and contract out that work. That was much more, I think, relevant to what school district may go through, because everybody's got contracts with lots and lots of bargaining units. And that was really all about saving money. Stephen actually helped me with that one in terms of some background information. But I think that was perhaps the most complex bargaining issue I had, was to avoid the claims of unfair labor practices along the way, tiptoe through all of them, which we did, and get a result that people could live with and not walk away hating the school district afterwards.
I've got a couple. One is, relative to school construction, if you're state assisted, besides being subject to the Mass School Building Authority, with state assistance, you have to comply with the Office of Supplier Diversity requirements. And their documents aren't, it's not seamless integration with the public bidding requirements and the OSD's requirements. So it's trying to find the right way to put that out to kind of protect the awarding authority from bid protests on the what ifs as you comply with the numerical requirements for participation in the Office of Supplier Diversity. And, you know, what if that is the low bidder does not meet those? Can you bounce them? It's kind of still an open question, I think, in my mind, of with the Attorney General's office. But so that's one kind of glitch, I think, in the public laws that has not been remedied, even though I've talked to the gentleman that manages the Office of Supplier Diversity about that difficulty, as well as Deb Anderson at the AG's office. The other one that was very difficult was I had a regional school district that had entered one of those energy management improvement contracts that had a lease financing portion to it. And they were well along with the work when someone told them that that was in fact debt, and they didn't have all the requisite improvements, and requisite approvals from the member towns to enter all the contracts that were signed months ago, and the work was well on its way. So we worked to kind of backfill the approvals that were required for that procurement matter, and the numbers were significant. And there was a lot of screaming going on as we had to kind of explain ourselves as to how we got there, but we did get everything tied up and in proper order.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question before I turn it over to Madam Chair. And that is, sometimes things are legally correct. And what do you do to ensure that you do what's culturally correct for your client?
Probably that works more along the kinds of areas of law that I work with, because I do more of the human resources element and work with, you know, teachers and actually all of the bargaining units and all of the staff. So it could be teachers, it could be, you know, cafeteria workers, paraprofessionals, and so forth. I definitely flag those issues alongside my client. I would be hard pressed to say that, as you point out, there's the legally correct way to do things, and there's the way that's going to make the work relationship continue in a more harmonious fashion in the long term. I'd be surprised if I was the first person to notice that. My point being, if my client is calling me with a question, my client is going to understand, or at least I think so, that, listen, we could do this, but this is the ramification. And if they don't see that, I am obviously going to point that out to them. I say obviously just because that's who I am. I'm not the kind of person who's going to hide behind anything. I'm going to tell my client, listen, we can do this because the law allows you to do that. But is that really what you want to do in the long run? Because, or even in the short run, I think it is very important to get along at work, to get along in life, to get along in your family. It just makes for an easier existence. And I am very much aware that, as I said, harmonious relations are important. And I will certainly point out to my client that I would, in the end, in that situation, I would probably err on the side of not being legal, of not pushing the legally correct envelope or not doing. I always am aware too, and I tell my clients this, they may be taking an unpopular position sometimes, and that may not be the same as being legally right and doing the right thing. The unpopular position sometimes may be the one they need to take, because if they don't stand up to certain issues, they could replicate and go on and on. And I also have a lot of those conversations. I actually had such conversation recently with a client where I've told them I really don't know that you're going to win this case. Lots of times clients say in an arbitration, what's my chances? Am I like 50-50, 75-25? And I said less than 50-50. But this is a really important social issue for them. They terminated a teacher who they felt had engaged in some inappropriate social media conversation to the point that it could hurt, you know, the students in their school district, to have it known that a teacher has these types of proclivities and is willing to say these things publicly. We can all think a lot of things, but sometimes we need to keep them to ourselves. This teacher didn't do that. I told my client it's going to be it's going to be tough to win this case. And I offered like 3 suggestions on how to avoid that and what else they could do short of it. But the principal felt that he needed to make the decision to sever the employment relationship. He did. Interestingly enough, the union, you know, did its due process requirement, but then cut loose the teacher and said, we're not going to represent this teacher going forward. But it still doesn't mean we're going to win the case. But it is one of those it's a hard situation where my client knows they may not win. In fact, they know they're probably not going to win, but they feel they've done the right thing and I'm there to support them. But as I say, I think that's a little different than the situation where you can be legally right, but I don't think it's necessary. I'm not a gloater. I don't like my clients to do that. I think it is more important to be fair. Know that you're going to be working with these people a long time, appreciate who you've got, and let's try to make this work without being right.
I'd just add that I think it's just kind of a common sense conversation. It seems, you know, I think the district has a very sophisticated administration, so I'd expect it wouldn't be required that often, but I've had occasions where either for a town manager or some executive, if they need cover that the law constrains us from doing what everybody wants us to do, I'm happy to draft a memo that says, here are the, you know, the statutory constraints on us to help you explain why this is the position, and, you know, just work with the client that way.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Kimberly and Stephen. And now I'd like to open it up to the Northborough School Committee, if there are any questions from a member of Northborough. Okay, seeing none, go on to Southborough. Roger Challen.
Hi, Kim and Stephen, and thank you very much for your presentations. I'd really like to direct this to Kim because it's really a question I have about your view of labor law and how it may segment down to municipal labor law or maybe even school labor law. Do you view either labor law for municipalities or for schools to be more of a kind of a sub practice, if you will, and there may be differences, especially when you get to schools that you generally don't see in the broader context, or not? And if you do see that, I appreciate you just mentioning a couple of things that come to your mind.
In my experience, Mr. Challen, I think that my approach, or I would say my clients' approaches to negotiating in schools versus municipalities generally is there is a stronger effort to be more, a less acrimonious tone, let's put it that way, in the school setting. And I'm not saying that it's an acrimonious tone necessarily and I'm thinking of, say, police and fire, but in the towns I work in the ones where I've done the negotiations, there can be some more difficult relations with the municipal negotiations. And it could just be a function of the towns I work in compared to the school districts. But I think the school district clients I work with really want to be appreciative of, you know, the biggest bargaining unit is going to be your teachers. I mean, you have to be appreciative of everyone, but they typically take the lead. And you know, a lot of other bargaining units look to what did the teachers get? How did you handle this? But I think it's important because you've got the teachers teaching your students. They're there in the community. It's so important to have a very strong, favorable negotiation style with the teachers. And that doesn't always work as well in the municipal area. That's been my experience. Police and fire can be tough. And it
All
can be a
right.
little bit different in that regard.
That's interesting. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thank you, Roger. And now from the region, is there any member from the regional committee that would like to ask a question? Okay, seeing that we have no questions from the region, I'd like to turn it now over back to Heather and to Greg. And thank you, Stephen and Kimberly, for being here tonight and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, could I just take one moment of your time, because I do want the committee to be aware of one thing before you end up deliberating over legal counsel. I think it is important for you to be aware that our firm does work in, like, we have attorneys that do a fair amount of permitting work and land use work in the two towns of Northborough and Southborough. Because of that, it would require the towns to vote to appoint the firm as a special municipal employee. And that's an ethics issue under Chapter 268A of our Mass Law. So Stephen and I are not the ones, and anybody who would work on your engagement in terms of the school work, they're not the same attorneys as the ones that are handling matters in the two member towns. But if you have questions about what that really means in legal terms and you wanted to ask Stephen, he may be a little bit better to give you a broader answer. But I think for now, I just wanted to point that out to the committee members to take that into account. Full disclosure. Thank you very much.
Okay, could you just go in a little more detail on that, please?
Sure. Stephen, do you want to give us a little bit more information to the committee? Thanks.
Yeah. So we are a Central Mass firm with 65 attorneys, and we do land use development. I do a fair amount of land use development. And if to represent a regional district, we would be precluded if we don't obtain special municipal employee status under 268, the conflict of interest law, from working in the two member towns on other matters like representing a property owner. So our firm, because we have these broad other practice groups, would request that if appointed, the district would support us a request to the two select boards that we be designated as special municipal employees. So we're not precluded from other unrelated matters in the two towns.
So that would be, if I could do a follow-up question. So that would be a vote by the select boards in both towns. It doesn't mean it would be a town meeting vote, correct?
Correct. The selectmen appoint that. That's right.
The selectmen do that. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your consideration. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this evening. All right. And finally, we have the law firm of Norris, Murray, and Peliquin with attorney Tim Norris and attorney Melissa Murray.
Okay, there I am.
Good evening, Tim and Melissa. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Good evening.
Thank you. So if you would like to share about your firm, and do you have a PowerPoint or?
I do. Can you let me share, and I will share it with you right now.
You are the co-host now.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll try to use that power wisely. Okay. All right. So I'm Tim Norris, and I'm joined by Melissa Murray. We're partners in the law firm of Norris, Murray, and Peliquin. And thank you very much for having us tonight. So I'm going to have Melissa introduce herself and talk about her background a little bit. I'll do the same, and then we'll talk a little bit about the services our firm offers.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm excited that we get a chance to tell you a little bit about our firm and what makes us special. As Tim mentioned, I'm Melissa Murray. I'm a graduate of Holy Cross and Suffolk University, where I obtained my JD and MBA. I have been practicing labor and employment law for a little over 10 years now. I started with our predecessor firm, Collins, Loughran, and Peliquin, as a law clerk in 2008. And I started primarily interested in labor and employment law. And after only being with the firm for a very short time, I realized that I really had a huge interest in education law, which makes sense. One of my parents is an attorney, one of my parents is a teacher, now retired, and so it kind of made perfect sense. My wife is a director of counseling services at an education nonprofit, so it really was a good fit for me to have this opportunity to work with teachers and administrators and those folks who are working in the education field. So what I do on a day-to-day basis really is provide that day-to-day advice, counseling, feedback for our school clients, where they just either want to run something by somebody in the office, or they have a big situation come up and they need someone to kind of walk them through what the next steps are going to be and how it should be handled. And that's the part of the job that I really enjoy. I think, and you probably all know this quite well, but there's a lot being asked of our school administrators and our teachers that isn't necessarily why they signed up to go into the field of education. There's a lot of reporting, there's a lot of requirements. And so I enjoy helping them work through and giving them the tools to kind of handle those tasks as quickly and efficiently as possible, or if necessary, helping them by doing those tasks for them and with them so that they can get on to doing the important work around education that they really enjoy and best represents why they got into the field. So I think I'll stop there. I have more I'm going to say on other slides, but I'll let Tim introduce himself and the firm a little bit and then join you again in a moment.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. So I have 32 years of experience as an attorney. I know you're all thinking I must have started when I was 10, right? So I wish. So I'm a graduate of Suffolk Law School. Also, I went to Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations. I started my career in the Marine Corps. I was a prosecutor, and then I was labor counsel for Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. I've worked in a large Philadelphia law firm doing employment litigation defense, and also represented schools in that capacity. We did some representation of the Philadelphia Public Schools, and also represented the Office of Catholic Education for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. I've worked in a central Massachusetts firm that you guys have heard from tonight. And for the last 20 plus years, I've been with the firm I'm with now, which started out as Collins, Loughran, and Peliquin, and for the last 2 years has been Norris, Murray, and Peliquin. So I just want to talk a little bit about the rest of our team. So we have a total of 5 active attorneys. Our founding partner, Phil Collins, is still with us of counsel and helps us out from time to time, but isn't actively, taking new cases. Leo Peliquin is an attorney for 35 years. Brett Sabag has just joined us last year. He comes from a labor lawyer position within the federal government and was also a former prosecutor. And Antoine Ferris started, like Melissa, as a law clerk, only somewhat more recently, and has joined us as an attorney and has been working with us for 2 years as an attorney, and a very promising one, as they all are. Leo is sort of our kind of our mentor and our go-to guy for all of the the legal issues, given the breadth of his experience as a few years beyond mine. So our firm is all labor and employment and education. So while we do work for cities and towns, we only do labor and employment work for them. And for schools, which there are probably about 20 school committees that we represent, we do a variety of things that we're going to talk about, but pretty much the things that are within the scope of the practice that you're looking for. From open meeting law, from student rights and discipline to labor and employment. Now, the work that we do for municipalities is all labor and employment work. So we're not out there doing zoning appeals or or any of the town council type work that they also have attorneys do. And so we think that gives us a good mix, because schools are mostly labor. I mean, they're incredibly labor intensive. They tend to be the largest employer in the community, and probably I would say 70% of the issues that come up in our school practices are labor and employment issues. So we do have a lot of that experience to call upon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our employment practice and our labor practice. So we do sort of everything soup to nuts with our school and labor and employment clients. I do we represent clients in federal court. There may be Fair Labor Standards Act claims, Wage Act claims, discrimination claims. We go to the MCAD. For our municipal clients, we go to civil service. We go to the Department of Labor Relations for unfair labor practices. And the appeals from all of those agencies we handle in Superior Court and through the appeals court to the SJC as necessary. Our preference is to not get to those places. We try to look at things from a litigation standpoint, but we also try to solve your problems or help you solve your problems really at the lowest possible level of where the problem can be solved most economically. In terms of labor, we're some of the most experienced attorneys in the Commonwealth when it comes to negotiating contracts and handling issues with unions. I have negotiated probably over 100 teachers' contracts and every other kind of employee that schools employ. I've negotiated first contracts for teachers, which is unusual. I've negotiated obviously a lot of mature agreements with teachers and a lot of first contracts with paraprofessionals and other types of employees. We're very adept at alternative dispute resolution. We have taken cases on the municipal side to interest arbitration. Unfortunately for schools, that's not something that's really available to unions. If there isn't an agreement, it can go to fact finding. We've done fact finding. It's not something that that a lot of places get to, and hopefully you never have to worry about that. So we do kind of the full gamut, and it's what we do every day. We're in schools. I mean, lately we're not in schools. We're in little boxes, but for the most part, our practice takes us into schools frequently. We're very familiar with kind of the ebb and flow and the different cultures that a lot of different schools provide. So those are a couple of the things I'd like to let Melissa talk a little bit about some of the things she does and some of the other services we provide.
Okay, so don't let the size of the font on this page fool you. This stuff is very important. There's just a lot of it, and that's why it's so small. It's not to say that it's not, top of our list in terms of what we provide. As I mentioned, in my opinion, so much of what we do, I do personally, and what clients really appreciate and I think rely on us a lot for is that advice and support that we give on a daily basis. And it can be, I regard communications with the clients as very important. I mean, everyone that I work with has my cell phone, the office number, email. I mean, we are in touch regularly. So if something comes up that we can respond to it in a very timely manner in the way that they need it responded to. And sometimes it's just a matter of the client wants to send you something over the weekend and make sure that you got it so it can be handled on Monday, you know, and we try to provide that peace of mind saying, yep, got it. We'll review it. We'll get in touch with you. So personal communication is key. One of the running jokes that so many clients have is like, we should just get you an office here. This would make it so much easier. So I think that is very important. We talk through plans. Clients have issues that come up either with a comment that a teacher made, something that was posted on social media, a discipline issue with a student, something that happened on an online class, something that was in the background of somebody's Zoom box that, you know, may or may not have been appropriate. And what do we do? Who investigates? Who do we bring in to talk about it? What's the appropriate response? And so that's the sort of thing that we can either handle the investigation for the school or the school district, or I can be in the background and I can coach someone through and teach them kind of the best way to go about that. This also relates to professional development. We have a training that we do on conducting effective investigations. So a lot of times, you know, when we start off in a district, or if it's been a while and there's new staff members, we might handle some of the investigations for a while, but eventually what we want to do is to give people the tools to do some of this themselves as well. So we'll do the investigations training, we'll provide samples, sample reports, questions, checklists, protocols for the staff members, and get them trained so that then they can do the investigations themselves. And then what we're doing is I'm helping to oversee it from the background and giving them some advice and support on how to get that done. And that piece is still really important, even if the staff person has the tools, because we want to make sure that you get in the end what is the best product to get you the best outcome. You don't want to make a decision based on a report where it turns out you didn't interview 2 key witnesses. And you don't want to have someone doing an investigation that has an obvious bias. So there are things that we can help just make sure that you've checked off and taken care of, so that when you get to the end result and you have a report or you have an idea of where you want to go, it's well supported. And if you have to make a tough decision, we can help support you through that. And we know that we have the background information to support that decision. Was that my cue? Am I out of time?
No, I just accidentally clicked on something.
The other thing, and this was, is student discipline. We have a student discipline training that we do, sample letters that can be used and adapted to the district. You know, their student discipline regulations, those changes are a few years old at this point, but you'd be surprised, maybe not surprised, how many schools or school districts accidentally use the old letter from before, or haven't saved things properly, or forget one of the requirements that you're supposed to do in terms of notice before having a meeting with a parent. And so just having that training every once in a while is important. Having those sample letters that you can use and look at, even if you decide to personalize it to a specific situation, it has in there what you need to do. So it's just a good checklist and a reminder. The other thing that I do as part of my practice is special education law. I help some of our school clients with special education. So with student discipline, it's important. Even if we're not providing your school district with special education law, oftentimes student discipline issues come up. And if the student is receiving special education services on a 504 or an IEP, there's different ways that you have to handle that discipline process. And so the person who's advising your administrators through that should be aware of that to make sure that you don't have a procedural misstep. You know, we also review legal documents, contracts, vendor contracts. Usually it has to do with buses and some other service that the school wants, but I have also reviewed some construction contracts for clients. I've represented clients at the Attorney General's office on vendor bid protests when, you know, there's an issue where someone has challenged something. So we've done that. School committee support, always available for the school committee. Every district has kind of a different approach to this. Sometimes you'll mainly be in communication with the chair. Sometimes you'll work through the superintendent. Happy to do it whatever way works best for your school district. You know, just yesterday I was advising a school committee chair on the approach they want to take to bargaining a change in the school time for the school day. And then I also had a conversation with the superintendent about settling a possible an employee that we would like to terminate, a possible settlement. So there's all different ways and approaches to how that can happen. And we kind of take our key, we kind of do what the school district wants us to do in terms of who's the point of contact for what different issues. And then professional development. So I mentioned the conducting effective investigations. We also have trainings on, as I mentioned, student discipline. We've done a training on the new Title IX regulations. We have a training on 504 policies, IEPs, and then really it's about specializing trainings to what you may need. And that could be something that you identify yourself or from working with you, or based on concerns that may come up that are repetitive, might say, you know what, you might want to think about doing a training in this area. And here's what we can do to help you. So that is something that we think is really important. I think one of our approaches is not just to do the work for you. It's great, but is to give you the tools so that you can do some of the work for yourself, and then we can be there in a supportive role. We don't need to just do all your investigations for you. If you have the capacity to do it yourself, then we can help guide you through that. So I don't know where we are for time, but I think I'll stop there and make sure that we have enough time for questions.
Yeah, so I'll just add one thing to what Melissa was saying, because this is something she's very much a part of. So we do a monthly newsletter that goes out, with updates on, labor, employment, and school matters. And during the first, few months of the shutdowns with COVID, there was so much new stuff coming out. We were doing a pretty extensive weekly newsletter, and I believe you have samples of all that in the materials that we provided. But we are committed to pushing out information to you, that you need, when you need it. So.
Thanks, Tim. I did forget that. And I'll also just add, in terms of getting that information and providing it to clients, is that we're on a lot of various committees and groups and organizations, both, in Massachusetts locally and then also nationally. So there's the Council of School Attorneys, and there's a listserv for that. And I'm on the Labor and Employment group. There's the Massachusetts Association of School Attorneys. There's the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association. And so we're active in all of those groups, and that kind of keeps us up to date. And then we're able to pass that information on to our clients as well. And then we often participate and provide trainings for those groups as well. So thank you.
All right, there it is. So at this point, we'd be happy to take questions.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. Now, if you could just share with us an example or a situation where you had a complex public legal matter and how you approached that.
So I can think of one. Melissa and I worked on a case that went to the appeals court. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. This was one of the cases that I started on as a law clerk, and it was several years it took to resolve this. So I was still working on it when I was an attorney with the firm, but it was an arbitration, a teacher dismissal. We inherited it from another attorney. We took over representation of the school district, and the arbitrator had reached a decision that the teacher had engaged in unprofessional conduct and should be and upheld the termination. Her attorneys appealed that, and the Superior Court said that the arbitrator hadn't considered certain evidence that she should have considered, and then remanded it back to the arbitrator. The arbitrator felt her hands were tied and ended up overturning her original decision and putting the teacher back to work. So that was in 2004. Years and years of litigation went on until we made it to the appeals court and got that reversed and had the teacher's original dismissal upheld in 2013. In the meantime, the teacher had to be put back to work. She engaged in more misconduct. She was terminated again. There was a second arbitration, and on all of those cases, we prevailed, and ultimately we were able to help. There were some missteps, I think, in the beginning before we took over on the case. I think one of the things that we do a really good job at is trying to guide a client and build the case that we need for you to be successful. And this was a case where it wasn't that it took us that long to build the case for the client. It was a matter of we got stuck between the Superior Court and then being bounced back to the arbitrator and then being bounced back. Once we had a final decision for the Superior Court, the appeals court took the case up. They decided in our favor pretty quickly. The other side tried to appeal to the SJC, and the SJC did not hear it. So that was very complex. It was very labor intensive, but in the end, it was the right result.
Thank you. And Have you represented clients with conflict of interest and ethics matters?
Yes. So I can talk about a situation where we had an inspector general investigation of a superintendent that got picked up by the local media, and it turned into somewhat of a circus. And really, it turned on what it ended up turning on, and this is a gross oversimplification, but it was a misunderstanding of regional finance. Um, the investigator for the IG, sort of took it upon himself to, he thought he had the smoking gun because he didn't understand um, how E&D worked in a regional school district. And so, that got turned into a report, which got turned into sort of a media sensation. And it ended up being, sort of a multi-front battle of, managing, public statements, managing information requests from a number of different agencies, and managing, sort of our own, political efforts to, to get the right, the right people to look at the situation, which ultimately happened, and we were able to resolve it, without any litigation. But it was something where, we had to go and the superintendent and I, were joined at the hip, and we had to sort of go around the circuit and talk to, a number of different, communities and FinComs and town officials and city officials in order to, sort of set the record straight because of some of the, the falsehoods that had been spread. So that was an example.
Okay, thank you. And you had mentioned investigations. Can you tell us about when you've been called in to lead an investigation as an outside representative, leading the investigation when it comes to Title IX or civil rights matters?
Sure. So this is something that we get involved in quite a bit, and from a lot of different perspectives. Melissa and I have both personally gone in and done investigations in situations where, for example, Melissa, I know Melissa was involved in an investigation, and I was involved in the litigation piece of a teacher that was assigning students to seats based on gender. Basically, the young woman would come in, and he would say, "Oh, you're very pretty. I'm going to seat you in the front," and on and on. So that was something that got surfaced and then was investigated, and the teacher was held accountable. I've also gone in personally and done investigations into alleged child abuse of a teacher on student child abuse situations, where the question was whether school administrators were aware of certain information and when they became aware of it. We've also had the school districts hire outside investigators for certain situations, and sort of it becomes it's a conversation among the affected school administrators and us as counsel as to what is the right approach. Sometimes using an outside attorney when we think there's going to be a lot of intensive litigation is the right approach, and we've done that in a couple of situations, particularly where we have allegations of teachers dating students, and we've had a couple of those in the past year. So those are a bunch of different situations, and part of the conversation is how do we manage that investigation? Do we hire the investigator as counsel and have certain things protected by attorney-client privilege? Do we support someone in the organization to do the investigation because that skill set is there, and the individual has the time and ability to do that investigation? So those are some of the things that we talk about and look at in those situations.
Okay, thank you so much. And I will turn it over to Madam Chair for the school committee questions.
Thank you, Heather. At this time, I'd like to entertain questions from the school committee members. Is there one from Northborough K-8 School Committee? I see we have one from Southborough and for the region, two from Southborough. Is there any from Northborough? Okay, seeing that there's none, I will go to Kamali from Southborough.
Okay. Early on, you mentioned, or I should say at the end of the presentation, you mentioned professional development as one of the services that you provide. I'm curious to know if that's just part of the relationship, or are each of those types of PDs have a different billing associated with them?
A good question. There is billing associated with them. It could just be for our time. If it's, for instance, the investigations training, we have that one pretty well developed. It's just a matter of if you have any specific instances that you want us to focus on, we can update that and do it. So it would be a matter of our time just to go out and do the investigation. If it's over Zoom, that cuts down on travel time. But so that sort of training would usually just be a matter of our time, and it can either be done hourly or on a special arrangement. Sometimes, both of us will present if it's a larger group, so we can do breakout groups, but we may only, charge for a certain portion of the time. So that it's really dependent on the situation. If it's a training that we have to totally develop from scratch because you have something very unique that you want us to address, then it would also involve some time putting together that presentation. But as I mentioned, we do have a number of kind of what I think are pretty relevant and often requested topics that we have trainings for already. So.
Okay. I have another question as well. I'm curious to know, do you mostly represent schools that are in this, what we call Metro West area, or are you branched throughout the state? Is there a mix of this area and downstate Massachusetts? Could you elaborate?
Sure. I mean, my answer would be it's a mix. We kind of represent schools all over the state, but I think in your area in particular, we do have a pretty good presence. Tim, I'll let you talk a little bit about that since you're more local than I am.
Sure. So yeah, kind of what Melissa said, I would say it's mostly, it's the eastern half of the state. We don't go out that far. We represent Pathfinder Regional, which is probably as far west as we go at this point. We have Greater New Bedford, which is as far south as we go. But, we have, Norwood and, a number of schools kind of in that same, in your same general area, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, Tim, maybe you want to take this too. How do you feel, stepping into potentially represent our school district? What does it mean for your firm, why you would like to get involved with the Northborough, Southborough School District? Knowing that you're stepping into the shoes of a firm that previously represented us maybe for decades now.
Well, this is a situation that we sometimes have where, anytime we get a new client, they have been they've been having legal advice from somebody. And, sometimes that's an adjustment. I think, the key to starting any new relationship is, whether it's, with a school district or a city or town, it's communication and trust. You have to feel like you can trust us to hear what it is that you have to say. And, we have to, try to let you understand, what our thought process is, when we approach things. And if we're wrong and we're making an assumption about something, or there's some unique aspect of the culture in your school district that we need to be aware of, then we need to have an open mind and be able to hear that and be able to understand that that's a possibility, because, you know, we don't know everything. And we, you know, we come to every school district with, yes, so, you know, a wealth of experience of what goes on in other school districts, but not with any assumptions that every school district is the same in every aspect. So I think, you know, it's really, for us, it's about listening, and you know, and trying to hear, you know, what it is that is unique about your district, and about your approach to the legal issues that you're going to ask us to help you with.
Thanks for that. That's all that I have, Heather. I don't know if Melissa wanted to add something, but that's all that I have.
Okay, thank you, Kamali. From the region, I have Kathleen Holland.
Good evening. Thank you for the presentation. I'm interested in your reference to special education litigation or legal concerns, and I would like to have an example of that kind of a work in your approach to this very tender work. Thank you.
Thank you. So, so Tim and I both handle special education law and matters. I guess in terms of our approach, some of it depends on the client, but one of the things that I do in my practice is it starts early on. We're not really allowed to be at IEP meetings unless the parents are represented by an attorney as well. So you don't always have an opportunity to be at meetings, but I try to talk to the team ahead of time about any concerns that they may have. And then if there's a dispute about an IEP, what I do in my practice is look over the IEP and I raise any questions with the clients that I may have in terms of have you thought this through, possible questions that I think the parent's attorney might ask or be concerned about, and try to resolve those issues up front. So if we can put together, the best kind of IEP, put that forward initially, then we can probably cut back on a little bit of the dispute and hard feelings. So if I see a question or a red flag, then I want to ask the school district to take a look at it and see, what did you really mean here? What should we be doing? So I do a lot of case review and assessment for clients. If they have an issue with an especially difficult or sensitive situation with a student or a family, I'll go through the whole file, usually the last 3 to 4 years, because there is a statute of limitations. But if I need to understand the whole history, I'll do a more thorough review, and I take a look at it and I try to identify what I see are potential problems or concerns for the client, and then help guide them through that process. And then ultimately, there are just times when the school district and the family are far apart, and part of that has to do with families always wanting the very best for their child, and it's not that the school district doesn't want to provide everything that the family wants, but if we did that for every single student and every single family, we wouldn't have the financial resources to do anything else. There's a legal standard that we have to meet in terms of providing a quality of education and a free appropriate education. So we need to make sure that we're meeting that standard. If at some point we can't kind of reach an agreement on what that means for the student in terms of services, then oftentimes families do file, or sometimes school districts have to file too if there's an emergency. If a student really needs to be in another environment and the parents aren't signing an IEP or referral to maybe look at an out-of-district placement or a different classroom setting with additional supports, and they're maintaining a student in a regular education classroom and it's becoming a safety issue, then there are times that a school district might need to file. So I kind of help guide the client through all of that. Eventually, if we end up at the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, we would represent the school district through a hearing. There's also a mediation process, which is usually very, very effective. And so we would be part of that. I think too, in COVID, there was a lot of questions about how special education services get provided, because for a long time, when we were virtual, and there are a lot of students that really need to have that one-on-one attention and be in a classroom with a schedule and in one-to-one support. And so how COVID has impacted special education services is a whole thing that is evolving right now as well. So I think I just went on a little tangent there for you, but it's something that I have a lot of interest in. I think it's a collaborative relationship. Try to keep it, maintain the relationship between the school and the students and the family as much as possible, but also recognize that at some point that we might have to defend ourselves in litigation. And so I helped to position the school district so that they have put forward exactly what they need to in terms of complying with the law and make sure that we're best positioned to defend ourselves at the Bureau.
Okay, and the last question from the school committee will come from Roger Challen, the chair of the Southborough K-8 School Committee.
Hey, Melissa and Tim, thank you very much for this presentation. I have two questions. I'll ask them at the same time, and it really is for either of you. A couple of things are certainly distinctive about your firm from the others we've looked at. I mean, one is obviously your size. And the other is that your specific focus on school law, municipal labor and employment law. Could you speak to why you think those make your firm a better choice for us?
Sure. Let me take a stab at that. So, you know, municipal labor and employment and municipal school law is a subspecialty. You know, when you are in the public sector, you're the government. So, you know, in addition to a lot of the, you know, statutory and regulatory constraints that you have on you, you also have the U.S. Constitution. And, you know, you have to, when you think about, you know, staff and student rights, you also, you know, you have to think about their statutory rights, but you also have to think about their constitutional rights. So those are the kinds of issues, you know, that we are intimately connected with constantly. Now, in terms of, you know, the size of the firm, I mean, you know, every bigger firm has a smaller group of folks that focus, you know, on labor and employment and focus on education. And so, you know, we're the size of those smaller groups in many firms. You know, we're closely connected. We work together closely. We have familiarity with what each other are doing. The things that we're working on, you know, across attorneys in the firm are very similar. We collaborate on things. And so, you know, when you call, you know, if one of us is on vacation, like I am right now, when you call, you know, you get an attorney that is, you know, not only well-versed in the areas that you know, need to talk about, but also maybe, and is most likely familiar with your situation, with your district, and may be familiar with the case that you're talking about. So I think, you know, our small size gives us the ability to work as a team in a way that bigger firms don't have. It's, you know, there's nobody that we walk down the hall in the firm and wonder who that is, right? So if we do, I'm not sure what to say about that. But so I think those are things that that set us apart. And, you know, yes, if you end up with a complicated, you know, ERISA claim or a complex construction litigation matter, you know, we know our limitations, and we know, you know, good attorneys in those fields that we can say, hey, you know, this is something that you should, you know, have looked at. But for 99% of the things that you're going to be faced with, and the things that are going to take up, you know, 99% of your time when it comes to legal issues and personnel issues and student rights issues, those are the issues that are our bread and butter.
Well, thank you very much for that. And Tim, I hope you continue to enjoy your vacation, by the way.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, because you had asked that question before, so I'd been thinking about it, and just in terms of the difference between some municipal negotiations and school negotiations, and it's been touched on, but I just want to say that in my experience, I've also noticed that school negotiations tend to have more of a team. Schools in general seem to have more of a team approach with all of their employees. I mean, you're working towards the same common goal. You're often, you know, you're just in committees together, you're working together, you're kind of a team. And so when you go to the bargaining table, you're just kind of bargaining with your teammates in a way. And so there is more of a collaborative approach oftentimes. It can't be about every single issue. There are obviously going to be disagreements, but that's a little bit different than some other municipal negotiations. Police and fire have more of like a paramilitary organization style within their ranks, right? So there's the difference across the table built into that. That's not to say that you can't have that team and collaborative approach in other municipal unions and units, but I do think it's kind of built into schools, just in the way schools run themselves in general, and the way everyone is pulling together for that same kind of common goal. So I don't know if that addresses your question, but that's something that I've noticed, and I do think is a difference on the school side.
It did, and thank you for that.
Okay, so in conclusion, Melissa and Tim, thank you very much for the time you afforded us tonight. And Tim, enjoy your vacation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
You're probably missed at the office, I can imagine.
Yeah. always.
Well, the great thing about COVID is we're all constantly missed at the office.
Well, enjoy for all of us on your vacation. Thank you very much.
And if anyone has any questions, our contact information is on the slides. I don't know who the correct point of contact is, but we're happy to answer any questions anyone might have after the fact. So thank you very much.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Kim and Melissa.
Greg, I just had one question, because I know that two of the firms that were presented tonight, they talked about the special ed. So in the procurement, or whatever the description was for the law firm, would the firm that we would be selecting, would they help out in special ed cases? Because I know we have a special line item for legal services and special ed, which is different than the regular.
So these firms would represent our general counsel and labor and employment side. We use Nuttall, McAvoy, and Joyce for our special education matters and counsel, and we've had a long-standing relationship with that specific firm, and they specialize in special education law, which again is a subset of kind of the education, and they have been outstanding in terms of their work with us as a district and some of the complex matters that have come forth.
Okay, thank you very much. So coming to the conclusion of the legal counsel interviews, I'd like to thank Heather and Greg and any other administrative staff that helped to bring these three firms before us, and vetting out probably the other ones that did not come through. But thank you very much for the effort towards this. And I believe that we will be not taking a vote tonight, but we will be taking a vote on March 17th at the combined school committee meeting. Is that correct, Greg?
That is accurate.
Okay. So that concludes the legal counsel interviews. The next item that we have on our agenda is audience sharing.
Joan, if I might, actually my hand is up again. I did have one question about this before we left the topic, if I might.
Sure, go ahead, Roger.
Through the chair. I would also like to say to Greg and Heather, I thought you did a great job of bringing us a distinct selection. You know, that doesn't always happen when you have choices. So I really thought it was excellent menu of choices for these firms. I think I need to be reminded of this from a funding standpoint. Are these folks potentially on a retainer? Are they hourly? Do we have any, and I understand this could be part of the discussion for the next meeting. Are there major differences in fees that you might be aware of? Just to at least leave us with thinking about a couple of those things.
Sure. So Heather, I'll speak to Brody, Hardoon, Perkins, and Keston. You know, because we've had a long-standing relationship. We've been on retainer with that firm over the past many contracts. Most firms do not have a retainer. That's kind of an old model. And what we plan to do moving forward is kind of giving you a financial analysis between the three firms and the differences in prices and what we're thinking, and giving you a little bit more data around the finances and the financial impact. Heather?
Would that be before the next meeting or at the next meeting?
before the next meeting. So it'll be in a memo format in preparation for your decision.
Thank you.
If I could just add, I know that we've had Brody, Hardoon, Perkins, and Keston on an annual retainer, and we went to a monthly retainer to give us some flexibility and to be able to do this and look at law firms. I know that the firms are their hourly billable rate is between $200 and $220 an hour. And that's pretty standard until you get into the big firms in downtown Boston, where their rates are higher. So I also did want to share and disclose that I have personally worked with Tim Norris and Melissa Murray on other employment and labor matters. So I did want to share that with you so that you're aware of that.
Okay, thank you. And also so the members will know that when we're looking at the firm and taking a vote in March, that we will be looking at a contract with one of these firms that would start July 1, 2021. So we will still be working on the monthly retainer with Brody, Harkoon, and Perkins and Kessler until that time. Is that correct, Greg?
That is accurate.
Okay, thank you. Any other feedback before we go on to the next agenda item? Okay, next item is audience sharing. And Greg, is there anyone that you see in the audience that would like to?
Could I just make a general comment or share some information? So I just want to speak a little bit about kind of increasing in-person learning. So I know Mr. Primack presented, had some questions. I will share that we have shared the survey data, and that has been through the vehicle of school committee meetings. So we've tried to be as transparent as possible. We do have a plan that we will be communicating. We were going to communicate Friday, but after some feedback from some folks about wondering what the plan is, we are going to communicate that tomorrow to families so that they have information and they can speak about it. And we will be having community forums and a process to increase in-person learning. We will begin at pre-K through 5 and then move to the middle schools and then the high schools. And lastly, I'll just say that this is incredibly complex, and I know people would love for it to move quickly. There are so many interconnected parts to moving back to more in-person learning. And we want to make sure we're thoughtful and thorough in the process, and we will be very transparent about the process and what we've laid out. And more information will be shared with the school committee at the upcoming meetings. And again, tomorrow the community will get a communication outlining the plan that we have moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Is there anyone in the audience, members that would, not the school committee, the audience in general, that have their hand raised that they'd like to comment?
I apologize for my dog snoring.
I forgot about your dog snoring, and I'm looking at everybody's face trying to.
I'm checking all the mutes. I'm like, who is that?
So Greg, that happened at our last meeting. I couldn't figure out what the hell it was.
So that is my dog. That is Lucy, who insists that she lies next to me during these meetings.
I love it. I think it's just the perfect soundtrack.
One of the side effects is she snores. So
getting ready to blame Paul. He was unmuted. Couldn't figure out where it was coming from.
I know, and Roger was looking down at the moment too. I was like, is that Roger? Did he fall asleep that quickly?
Now our meetings, no one.
I take that suggestion that I might fall asleep at, with such an esteemed group of people on with me that I take it kind of personally. I mean, someone would consider that I would do that.
When we get back to in-person meetings and you still hear the snoring, and then I won't have an excuse.
You'll have to bring the dog as our therapy dog, school committee. We have them in schools. Let's have a school committee therapy dog.
It does not look like there's any hands raised, Joan.
Okay, are there any committee members that would like to share anything at this time? Okay, seeing that there is none, I would like to have the Northborough, then the Southborough, and then the region to for the chairs to call adjournment to their committees.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Northborough, please.
Kelly Gannett makes a motion to adjourn.
Second. Lauren Bailey. Tie. Erin, go for it. Second, Erin Tagliaferri.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please. Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey Jones.
Yes.
Mrs. Gannett.
Yes.
Mrs. Tagliaferri.
Yes.
Myself, Keith LaBelle, yes. Motion passes unanimously, and we are adjourned.
Katura seconds it. Roll call vote. Kamali?
Yes.
Katura?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
And I vote yes. We are adjourned at 8:53 p.m.
Okay, at the same time, I'd like to entertain a motion at 8:53 for the region to adjourn.
I will move. Sorry, Mr. Bucka.
All right.
All right, so who wants it?
Okay.
Kath?
I'll second it.
Wait, who's making the motion? Kathleen?
Yeah, I guess. Are
Okay.
there brownies attached to being first? I've always wondered about that.
Yes, when we get back in open session, it'll probably be a dozen at that point. Okay, in a second by Paul Bucka, and it's a roll call vote. Karen has left. Paul Bucka,
Yes.
Chris Covino,
Yes.
Paul Desmond,
Yes.
Kathleen Highland,
Yes.
Kathy Key,
Yes.
Dan Kalenda.
No, I mean, yes.
Okay, the floor is yours. Go ahead. Shauna Shea,
Yes.
Kathleen Paluchko,
Yes.
and myself, yes, it's passed. It's unanimous. And we are adjourned.
I just want to, Joan, can I just make one remark, and that is just to thank Heather Richards for all of her work organizing the legal firms, and just thanking her for her expertise in this area. So thank you, Heather.
Here, here.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. You're a great asset to all of us. Thank you very much. And to the district. Thank you. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.